Welcome to Strait Forward, a podcast about Taiwan, the island at the center of technological innovation and the global fight for democracy. I'm Tsaiying Lu.
And I'm Libby Lang.
And Libby, I'm feeling so energized today.
I know. Are you hearing a buzz in the room right now?
I think you're radiating some positivity.
So if you can't tell, today is an episode all about energy and specifically energy security.
Yes, it's something that we've been wanting to talk about for a while. I know that we had sprinkled it in past episodes, but with all the buzz about the future of...
It's going to be a very punny episode. I get the feeling.
With all the energy or there's just like the need for power in general, right? Both in the United States and elsewhere. We thought, finally, we can sit down, have a conversation about the energy security situation that Taiwan is facing. Taiwan is actually extremely import dependent when it comes to energy. They import the majority, I think like 95-ish% of their energy, which is a large percent, right? And that means they're in turn very vulnerable to disruptions. Just thinking about all the considerations that Taiwan needs to think about when it comes to energy. I mean, number one, geopolitical risk, right? You have most of the energy imports arriving through the sea lanes in the Taiwan Strait, and obviously that could be a big choke point if something were to go wrong. Any type of blockade scenario or disruption could quickly choke off Taiwan's energy supplies. And of course, this will have an impact on the economy and their military and just societal resilience, right? That, imagine just like your entire power grid going out. You also, of course, due to the high demand needed for semiconductor supply or semiconductor production, obviously these fabs need a lot of energy, and increasingly with AI and with the higher demand for more advanced chips, right? This need for energy and secure sources of energy is continuing to grow. We expect the needs for energy, just like here in the U.S., in Taiwan to grow. And so, again, with all of these different factors, Taiwan really needs to sit down and think about the future of their energy security.
Yeah, and in terms of addressing sort of all three of those concerns, I think one option that has been floated, many times is nuclear energy, right? But as people may know, nuclear is a very contentious issue in Taiwan.
Extremely political.
Yes, it comes up in debate, year after year, decade after decade. Even just most recently, this August, actually, there was a referendum about nuclear energy in Taiwan. So looking at potentially restarting a nuclear reactor in southern Taiwan after they had, completed a complete phase out of nuclear energy earlier in the year in 2025. The results of that referendum were actually quite interesting. So while the total votes did not pass the threshold to pass in terms of the total yes votes, the number of yeses for restarting potentially this nuclear reactor greatly outnumbered the number of no's. So again, the referendum did not pass, so they are not restarting that nuclear reactor as a result. But it did show that there at least seems to be some level of openness to the potential to restart nuclear operations down the line.
Yeah, it was a really interesting indicator because it always baffles me how political the conversation around nuclear is in Taiwan. But so quickly before we get to our guest for this episode, we wanted to bring in our own SCSP in-house nuclear expert, Caleb Barnes. He actually has a master's degree in nuclear engineering. So let's bring Caleb in for some nuclear knowledge. Caleb, welcome.
Good morning.
You are radiating positivity.
Oh, thank you.
Some would say you're glowing.
That's the second one of those jokes.
Well, welcome to Strait Forward. Can you tell us in 60 seconds, what is nuclear energy?
Okay, I'm going to beat you on time. Hot rocks boil water. You take uranium, you enrich it in uranium-235, one of the isotopes. You use that, water moderates the neutrons, you get a reaction that sustains, and then use that heat, make steam, spin a turbine.
Hot rocks boil water would be a great tattoo for a nuclear scientist.
I was just thinking like a bumper sticker, but that works too.
Okay, maybe better. Okay, we're going to continue the lightning round theme here. We just talked a little bit about nuclear energy in Taiwan. It's been a hot topic, you could say, for a long time. We want to give you a couple of considerations that people have had around nuclear, again, for you to react to. Give us your lightning reaction. Sorry, again, for the puns. First, natural disasters.
Yeah, so... when we talk about natural disasters, we're really talking about Fukushima. And so that was a case with a reactor design that safety upgrades have been made to every reactor since Fukushima happened. But it was a tsunami that killed 15,000 people. And then as a result of the reactor meltdown, which could have been spared with delivery of diesel to the offsite power generators, but as a result of the reactor meltdown, 8 people died. So this this thing that became an international event that is what you think about when you think about Fukushima in 2011. It was something that really just pales in comparison to the scale of this once-in-a-millennia kind of tsunami that happened.
So even the double whammy of Taiwan, typhoons and earthquakes, you think it's, in the grand scheme of things, maybe not as big of an issue?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, number 2 consideration, nuclear waste. What do you do with all the nuclear waste?
So nuclear waste, most overrated problem in the history of problems.
That's a bold statement here on Strait Forward.
Yeah, it is. and I've read the history of problems. It's a lot like Nicole Krauss's The History of Love, but with less love and more problems. Nuclear is such an energy-dense technology that this high-level waste is really just a tiny amount of solid waste. It's not glowing green goo. It's solid rods.
Not radiating like you.
Thank you. For the U.S., nuclear has been about a fifth of our energy mix for about 50 years. All of the nuclear waste that we have ever produced, all that high-level waste, could fit on a football field about 30 feet high.
Oh, wow.
It's small. Most of it is just kept on a parking lot right next to the reactor building. Like if you go down to Lake Anna, like 2 hours south of here, like I've been a couple times, it's just like a small Walmart parking lot. And then they've got these things called dry casks where they keep that waste. Now, it is something that, is going to be radioactive for 500,000 a million years, and that concerns a lot of people. Now, there is natural radioactivity all around us, like radon's radioactive. If you live in a place that has a lot of granite nearby, that's radioactivity. Like the sun is emitting radioactivity all the time. So it is a natural thing that's all around us. But if we really want to get rid of this high-level stuff, we can just put it in an accelerator-driven reactor and burn it off.
Okay, wow. Solutions on solutions.
Sounds so easy.
All right, third and maybe final issue we'll cover today in the lightning round is the China question of it all. What happens if there's some kind of crisis in which China could target Taiwan's nuclear reactors as sort of a national security target?
I mean, I think it would be pretty similar to targeting any kind of electricity generation source. So, if a bomb strikes a natural gas plant or a coal plant, right, then it's still going to be put offline. And I would say nuclear has some inherent resilience in the fact that we've got these 3 foot thick concrete walls that are outside a reactor building. And so we did a test back in the 60s where we took like an F-15, some decommissioned fighter jet, and we flew it into that grade of concrete, and all that was left was scorch marks, right? It's really tough to penetrate that. So like the big things in Ukraine with the Zaporizhzhia plant, that's really been like loss of offsite power has been their big problem. And so that was in the news just this week where they restored offsite power. So in some ways, there is an inherent resilience with nuclear. And the fact that you could produce your own electricity in Taiwan locally and you don't have to rely on underseas power cables, like that seems like a much bigger vulnerability to me.
Well, a lot of food for thought. Thanks so much, Caleb, for coming in and being our on-the-spot nuclear expert. It's been wonderful to have you in.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, Channing, that was an absolutely electrifying conversation with Caleb. I feel much smarter about nuclear energy, and I think I'm really ready to dive into, the rest of the kind of energy question in Taiwan with our guest for today. Our guest today is Dr. Tsaiying Lu. She is a research fellow and director of the Energy Security and Climate Resilience Program at Taiwan's Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technology.
Tsaiying, welcome to Strait Forward. Welcome to our studio here in DC. We're really excited to have you.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you.
Can you start off by giving us a picture of Taiwan's energy stack? What are the unique challenges that Taiwan faces when it comes to energy? What makes Taiwan unique when it comes to these energy challenges? What does the energy landscape look like?
So Taiwan's energy electricity mix is combined with natural gas as top. So it provided almost 47% of the total electricity mix. And then it's followed by coal and finally renewables. Renewables right now currently accounted for like 13% as well. So we see that Taiwan's energy self-sufficient rate actually grows a lot since 2016 when our renewable transition policy in place. So that started from a very significant growth from 6.59% to right now 13%. So this is a huge growth in terms of Taiwan's energy self-sufficient, right? But still, there is a limit, like challenges during either its peaceful time or during Taiwan's contingency, because if it's high dependency on imported fuels. As I said, LNG, the liquefied natural gas, and coal, these are all imported. So once again, if there is any kind of interruptions in terms of maritime supply with all these LNG and coal, then of course, Taiwan's electricity power system will be affected. So how do we better counter all these kind of potential interruption would be the major challenges. But I can delve into that later with specific.
And could I follow up quickly? When you say renewables, could you give a rough breakdown of what those are?
Yeah, okay, sure. So solar powers right now is ranking the highest percentage of our renewables. And then followed by wind, especially offshore wind. We're currently still expanding that in Taiwan's territorial water. And probably we're going to see a huge growth for our offshore wind next year. And in total, so that could reach our goal to have 20% of renewable energy electricity generated by renewables for 20% next year.
Okay, well, we'll keep our eyes peeled for that.
Yeah.
I guess you mentioned, this contingency scenario, how important energy would be in a crisis situation.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what a worst case scenario would look like?
Mm-hmm. So the worst case scenario would be like no ships coming to Taiwan, right? So based on our simulation, DSET's done a model to say if there's no ship coming in and we're facing these blockade issues, then how can Taiwan survive for how long and with what kind of energy? So the worst case scenario would be, for example, we use the second day of the Lunar New Year, which represents the lowest industrial power need in a year. And compared to a typical summer days, that would be like 40% drops of the total demand. So once we have that demand curve, the demand low, we can see that if we don't have any ships coming in and we would like to best to utilize our LNG, right? So we'll turn the base oil power plant, we will shift to coal instead of gas currently. And then we do that combined with coal and renewables that could actually cover like 80% of the power demand. So that could actually sustain Taiwan for self-sufficient for like over 40 days or even longer if we're if we're factoring potential like power rationing mechanisms. Because during Lunar New Year, the second day, still there's fabs going on. Like for example, TSMC, there are still fabs working very hard. As you see, Taiwanese people work very hard even during holidays.
Yes, indeed.
So that's why still some fabs is going. And the worst case scenario would be if we're countering more like rigid, more like power rationing cuts in industrial sector, that could be like only 1/3 of the power demand will remain in place. So most of our industrial sector would just shut down. So that would be the worst case scenario. But to that point, we still have a lot of options in hand, and that could actually sustain for like 40 days or even longer.
Okay, well, I guess that's good to hear, but 40 days is still only 40 days, right? How has the current Lai administration factored in this energy resilience question into their whole of society defense resilience efforts, or just energy security or national security planning at large?
So I think for Taiwan, it is to diversify as much as we can in terms of our imported fuels and also in terms of our indigenous energy resources matters, right? So what the Lai administration did, for example, with Trump's deal, we trying to purchase more LNG from the United States so that we can diversify our current imported countries of LNG as many as possible. So right now, we have our biggest imported LNG from Australia, and second by Qatar, and then United States. And we can see maybe there will be a further increase with the deal with Alaska if that comes into place. A second thing is that for indigenous power sources, the Lai administration also stick to the renewable transition plan. So we're trying to build more, as I said. Next year, we can reach our goal to have 20% of our electricity be generated by renewables. And that could help a lot in terms of not just about we have our indigenous power source, but we also have a more distributed power system, which means right now, Taiwan's, like the biggest challenge I didn't mention is that Taiwan is now a centralized power system. And that could be vulnerable in terms of any kind of sabotages or attacks to the substations, which is very limited. And we depend on all these, like only 3 major high voltage transmission stations to try to manage the grid, right? And that could be the biggest vulnerability in terms of any kind of attack. So if we do have more renewables on the grid, and that could be a more distributed power grid as well in the future. So that is also one of the ways that the Biden administration now is trying very hard.
Can I follow up on that though? I mean, renewables, the reason why they're still such a small percentage of the overall energy mix is because they're actually quite unreliable, right? If you're relying on solar power, then you have to make sure that the sun is shining all the time. Similarly with wind, right? You have to be able to have enough wind. And these are just natural elements that sometimes you can't control. So why is there such an emphasis on this, on these sources of energy, especially when Taiwan's climate, I mean, it rains a lot more, there are typhoons and why is that such a big part of the strategy?
Mm-hmm. So as I said, part of the reason is trying to distribute our power system, the power grid as much as possible, right? So with renewables. And another thing is that although we see that this, as you said, solar and wind, their generating capacities very much relied on the weather, right? But still, if you see the numbers, actually every day today in Taiwan, we have 20% of our electricity actually generated by solar and wind. So 20% is actually really high. If you compare it to nuclear reactor, we only have 6% or 4% last year and early this year when we still have them. So I would say, in the short term, renewables and combined with our coal or our LNG gas that could actually supply most of the need in Taiwan. And if you also think about, right now, almost every company they will ask for green electricity. And that means for TSMC, for our big company, Google, with the more data centers being set in Taiwan, they will need more green electricity as well. So how can we also provide this demand that also matters and to help Taiwan to still have this strategic advantage in the global supply chain?
And so you mentioned nuclear, and I will say nuclear is something that Channing and I are really interested in the context of Taiwan. Obviously, it's something that's been debated for decades at this point.
Yes.
There's been a referendum on it, but following the referendum, President Lai has also made statements, expressing a potential openness to nuclear. Could you maybe just walk us through the politics of nuclear energy in Taiwan and how that has changed over the years?
Yeah, sure. So, just for the context, because I'm a historian.
Perfect person to ask.
So I got my PhD and I write something about nuclear history in Taiwan before. So, the polarized situation in terms of the pro-nuclear and anti-nuclear movements in Taiwan, why is it so? If you are pro-nuclear, then you are pro-DPP, and you are pro-KMT, and another you're pro-DPP. That is because that rooted in the 1980s when Taiwan actually experienced a drastic experience in terms of political transition. When we have our nuclear power plants starting to build up in the late 70s and 80s, and by then, the construction of nuclear power actually seen as a policy that is all under the authoritarian region, so that represents KMT without much concern or get the consensus with the locals at that time. So, and in the 80s, that's also when the DPP was funded. And so you can see that how the democratization movement is combined with anti-nuclear power movements together. And that's why that thing started to become polarized in the 80s. But I have to say that I think people get doubts with nuclear power plants. It's because of the nuclear incidents, the global nuclear incident. And once that Taiwanese people starting to sense how the disaster of systematic failures could cause for nuclear power plants failures that could cause for 3 Mile Islands, Chernobyl, and then the Fukushima, that actually it kind of stimulates a more polarized situation and political debates about nuclear in Taiwan. And right now, as you mentioned, we have our referendum on that, although it doesn't pass because the threshold. I would say right now, people are more willing to talk about nuclear power plants' role in Taiwan under different scenarios. So as I said, like wartime scenarios, now people are starting to talk about it. In the past, they didn't talk about the potential role for nuclear in war preparation. And, well, I have my opinions on that as well, but still, that's a difference. And then for that referendum, I think the result could be the Lai administration still wanted to emphasize that if Taiwan wants to have nuclear power plant or to resume nuclear power, it has to to apply for the three consensus, right? So the three principles, sorry. So one is that nuclear waste management needs to be better managed, and people have the consensus on that. And the third, the safety check needs to be passed. And safety check is the most important thing to actually check whether or not when the 40 years renewal, the 40 years license can be renewed, and then so that we can talk about resume, right? So right now, Taiwanese government and also the Taiwan company, they are trying to do this safety check as quick as possible for like maybe 1 to 2 years they can finish that. But still, I would say in the short term, Taiwan will not have nuclear power plants in place because even you pass the safety check, you still need to get a consensus. And if we take Japan as an example, Japan also took like 5 to 7 years to actually resume a nuclear power plant. That's because they need the consensus from the locals. So I would say, Taiwan has many different opinions regarding nuclear power plants, and we're now seeing it in different scenarios. And was that, from my perspective, that conventional nuclear power plant would be maybe harder to be in place in Taiwan for now. But advanced one, the light administration, they are pretty open to that. So SMRs, the fourth generation nuclear reactors, even nuclear fusion, these are all things that the Taiwanese government is looking to.
That's really encouraging to hear. I guess so. Previously, in our intro section for this episode, we spoke quickly with Caleb, who's on our team and works on some of the fusion work that we do here at SCSP. We threw at him some of these arguments that exist in Taiwan, right, about nuclear, right? The worry about natural disasters. What do you do with nuclear waste? And also what happens in the case of war if China were to weaponize those nuclear power plants. He says that regarding natural disasters, nuclear facilities are actually a lot more resilient than they seem, and so it shouldn't be as big of a concern as people make it out to be. Regarding the nuclear waste topic, he says that all the nuclear waste generated is actually still a much smaller amount than people think. He said, I think, 3 football fields?
A football field 30 feet high.
30 feet high.
It would be the U.S.'s nuclear waste.
Yes. Which I guess, it's a lot, but then also now it doesn't sound like as much as I think even in my head I had envisioned. And then third, regarding China weaponizing it, he said that, in Ukraine, they've actually seen that these nuclear facilities are a little bit more resilient than we had expected. So I'm just wondering, do you have responses to these?
Yeah, sure. So I think from the last point, we also did a op-ed just on the Ukraine war's experience. We wanted to highlight that because, during the debates for our referendum, the opposition party also saying that, nuclear power plant seems to be more resilient even to Ukraine's experience. But we actually saw that Ukraine's nuclear facility was the first target when in the first year of the attacks. So the cooling system and the interconnected power grid, power transmission line that were attacked, so that all these, I think there were 7 nuclear reactors need to be shut down because of this, because their transmission line were disrupted. And then I think that resembles Taiwan's situation because our 3 nuclear power plants are actually located in a very extreme location. So 2 in the northeast region, and the southeast one is our 3rd nuclear power plants, right? And they all rely on, for example, the 3rd nuclear power plants only rely on 2 transmission lines. And that could be super vulnerable in terms of, if you consider Ukraine's case, that could actually very easy to happen to Taiwan's 3rd nuclear power plant. So this kind of wartime scenario, I don't think people are actually think about this like thoroughly. And if you also for the nuclear waste problem, if you although it seems like a very comparatively probably just very a small amount if you can think about the scale or something. But if you put it in Taiwan is a very limited place with so many people condensed in several cities. And we have already been struggling to find a place to storage all this, not the fuel rods, but for only just the very low radioactive waste. That already encountered a lot of debates and also protests because still we don't have a consensus on that. So it's not just about the amount of the nuclear waste, I would say. It's about the place and how can you better communicate with your locals and to have scientific data also be as a way to convince all these locals that these are actually very safe and these are perfect place to storage all these things. So yeah, I think that's probably my very short response to that.
And can I go back to what you were talking about in terms of more advanced technologies and openness to that potentially in the future? Is that something that could in any way be retrofitted to existing facilities, or would this need to be completely new construction, a new project with very long, I imagine, timelines?
I think for the SMRs right now,
The
people
small
are,
modular reactors
Yes.
for our listeners who aren't energy experts.
yeah. So SMRs right now they're being mostly discussed in Taiwan, and that will locate in, like, for example, in the science park. So because that could directly support the like all these fabs need, or some of our data centers, perhaps like right now what is being pictured in the U.S. as well. So that would be very different from the conventional ones, because the conventional one would only be located in these three nuclear power plants, the locations. But I would say that instead of the locations, or just because of the locations, if this is going to be situated in the science park, all these regulations will need to be amended. For example, right now, our regulation for our nuclear power plants, they have a certain safety distance that is actually very long, and then if you wanted to adapt it to the SMR, so that would need a lot of things to be changed in terms of regulations. And another thing I wanted to highlight when we are talking about SMRs in Taiwan as well is that actually we've seen that the first one that got IAEA's approval for their safety standards and everything is China's model. And if Taiwan definitely will not depend on China's SMRs, right?
Fair.
And then we're still seeing the US trying to also get their models online, right? So, the Taiwanese government right now is monitoring all these progress and to see what kinds of the model will be the most feasible one for Taiwan, and that it also meets the global standard for IAEA standards. And also we have to think about the nuclear materials that will depend on, because all these SMRs, they rely on different coolants and different fuels that probably is also produced very centralized in China or Russia, and that will not be sustainable for Taiwan. So all these things need to be considered when we talk about the advanced nuclear technology.
And then the other one is fusion, right? You even
Yeah.
mentioned nuclear fusion, obviously a big effort here at SCSP with our Fusion Commission, and the excitement, I think, behind our current leadership in government about the future of fusion energy in the United States. What is the conversation around fusion in Taiwan?
Well, I think fusion will take a longer time to be realized, right? So the Taiwanese government still, we used to have this atomic, what's that? Atomic Council. Right now it's changed to Nuclear Safety Council, and they still have this team, specialized scientists. They have a team to study nuclear fusion. So I would say they are keeping an eye on that, but still we don't have this kind of nuclear industry to actually trying to produce or trying to have our own model for nuclear fusion. But instead, we're looking into the U.S. progress in terms of that. And my team also done an op-ed, which will be published very soon, on China's progress in terms of nuclear fusion as well. So glad to share with you.
Yeah,
Something we've
over.
published on here at SCSP recently too. So interested to read what you found. I want to switch gears a little bit, maybe, to talk about sort of a more specific topic to SCSP when it comes to energy. Of course, that's energy and how it relates to AI. We know that AI will require a lot of energy. And I know that earlier this year, DSET also published a report on this front. So looking at how specifically Taiwan semiconductor fabs use energy and how that factors in. As you mentioned, they need a lot of very consistent energy. So could you talk a little bit about how Taiwan is planning to make sure that its energy is able to meet those AI-driven needs of the future?
Yeah. So our reports is more focused on the advanced chip production and how that could be sufficiently supported by our power system. So, just a little bit on that first, and then I will talk about AI industry later. So TSMC's annual electricity consumption, I think, increased from 9 billion kilowatt hours per year until in 2016, and when it began producing these 10 nanometer chips and that increased to like 23 billion in 2023 when you started producing all these 3 nanometer chips. So we can see that there will be a substantial growth when it produces advanced chips under 2 nanometers in the future, and that's will also located in those fabs in Hsinchu and Tainan. So the major challenges for Taiwan is that we did a simulation model as well for the next decade, how Taiwan's power system may be sufficient for that kind of growth. And we saw that in the next decade, in terms of the total amount, that actually is a problem. Everything can be covered, even we counter in the 2 nanometers chips production in the next 10 years. But what's the challenging part is that how do we deal with, like I said, if they only consume a lot of electricity in Hsinchu and Tainan, how can we make sure that there's a bunch of power, electricity can be transmitted to these two places, right? To have a stable power output, which will rely on more distributed power grid as well, and distributed like all these substations being built in Science Park and also the different cities to trying to mitigate or to lessen the transmission. How do I say it? To mitigate the transmission pressure for the Taiwan power system as well. So that's the first challenge. And the second challenge is that, like I said, all these fabs, they're asking for more green electricity to be interconnected to the grid and also to supply their fabs, right? So right now, TSMC is our biggest client in terms of all these PPAs, the power purchase agreements with our offshore wind farms. So they will sign like 20 years of agreements and to buy 20 years of green electricity from offshore wind farms. And we still need that more in the future. So I would say that if we can overcome these two major challenges, and then we can make sure that our fabs can still have this strategic advantage in the future. And that goes the same with our AI data centers because, like I said, right now, we actually have a regulation in terms of Taiwan cannot have like data centers that will consume over 5 megawatts in the northern region. That's because, like I said, the transmission bottleneck that Taiwan has. So they didn't want to overconsume the Taipei's or the northern region's electricity consumption that actually added on the data centers in the future. So how do we better overcome this? That would be the major challenges instead of we just think about the biggest amount of that.
No, that makes sense. You also recently published some research on the undersea cables element to this. I think when people think about energy security, I certainly don't automatically think about undersea cables. So can you share a little bit about your research there? Why is that such an important topic for Taiwan when it comes to power?
Mm-hmm. So we started this research because our former Minister of Economic Affairs, he announced it last year that, okay, maybe, like I said, if we need more green electricity in the grid, then maybe we can invest it in Philippines and then transmit it back through some subsea power cable to Taiwan and then to, have all these green electricity as much as we can. But so that's why we're starting this research. But as I said, I think the Ministry of Economic Affairs, they do this feasibility survey and to see, okay, how like maybe the technical challenges to laying a cable under like 3,000 depths, how that can be overcome maybe by 2028. And then the feasible like cost, what the cost will be, maybe it should be under 4 NTD to actually make it work. They only do that kind of check. But from our perspective, we can see from the European experience the S-link to incidents interconnected between Estonia and Finland that were being cut by suspicious ships and these shadow fleets. We do see that, and that resulted in like the electricity price to jump, I think 2 or 2.5 times of the regular. And also that makes Estonia to think about, okay, maybe this is the time we construct another thermal power plant instead of relying on this green electricity transmitted back from Finland instead. So that could compromise the nation's economic security, energy security, and also their green transmission goal. So that's why we see this topic is really especially very important for Taiwan. We cannot endure, for example, 6 months repair time for a power cable to be cut, right? So that's why our report wanted to focus on that. And also from another point that we also highlight the supply chain risk in terms of the cables. So Chinese cable manufacturers also invested a lot and trying to invest in overseas markets as well. Like, I think you also you are the expert of this respect, right? So how China is trying to duplicate or to its patterns of the Huawei security threats. And I think that's also happening in the cable industry as well, for the power cable one, because communication cable, China has already dominated that supply chain. But power cable right now is the very critical time to do more to try and to stop this kind of dominance.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading that. And of course, DSET is always doing so much great research. I don't know how you guys have time to do anything else. But could you maybe share a couple of topics that your team is looking into next?
Okay, yeah. So actually, as I said, we trying to do as much as we can. So there's
and you're working really hard because you're Taiwanese.
Yeah, tons of topics that we're working on. So my team is energy security and climate resilience team. So we're trying to follow our research stream on energy security. So cables will be publishing, and then we're trying to have this probably a strategic dialogues between Taiwan, Ukraine, and Poland maybe next year. And because we are working on how can we better learn from Ukraine's energy resilience experience, and not just about how their nuclear power plants are not working as much as people imagine, but also think about how Ukraine people actually use all these like CHPs or other kind of small scale like renewables, like solar panels being installed several years, even during wartime, and try to helps a lot to maintain the power supply in different regions. So in Ukraine, so we do feel like these kind of experience Taiwan can learn a lot from them. So we will have this dialogue maybe next spring, and we're working very hard on that. And second thing, maybe I can share a little bit, like probably will be Channing and also Libby's interest, is that we're going to publish a report on China's investments under climate collaboration in Southeast Asia. Okay. So especially we focus on two things. One is that it's critical minerals investment in nickel industry in Jakarta. So we focus on how they are using these different investment patterns and trying to dominate the whole supply chain. Even if the Indonesian government actually has different like embargoes and also export bans on these nickels, but still they find a way to still dominate that supply chain, and we analyze the patterns of it. Second thing is that we analyze all these like person-to-person exchange between schools, universities, and also the tools. They are bringing all these like think tankers, journalists to China and to see how they are doing very good on renewable transition or coal phase out transition, and trying to to tell a better good story for China, right? So these things we'll be analyzing our China reports very quickly, I think next month. So we'll be able to share with you.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about all that. I'm glad you're looking into Southeast Asia, because especially what China's doing, because to China, right, it's their backyard, or they consider it their backyard, and I think a lot of what they do in Southeast Asia is actually an indicator of what they're going to try to do in the rest of the world. So I look forward to reading that and great research topics. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We like to end all of our episodes with a fun question because we want our audience to better get to know Taiwan. So do you have a Taiwan recommendation for our listeners?
Okay. So I want to be serious, so I will recommend.
Not too fun.
It could be fun.
I mean, if I want to be serious, I will recommend the Invisible Nation that could actually tell a story on Taiwan as a country and what's its struggles. But personally, I love the series. I don't know if you know this. Like, this used to be a book, and later on adapted to a TV series called《淑女养成记》. It's I think in English, the making of an ordinary woman, and it depicts how a girl that was raised in Tainan, and she experienced a different generation expectation toward, and to balance that and to grow as an independent woman since the 1980s. So she grew in the period in an era that Taiwan is experiencing vastly on the political transition and also social transition as well. When she also experienced the time when Taiwanese people cannot speak Taiwanese, and how she grew into a woman in a so I do think that story tells a very warm thing, and also combine to have this different, like also you can see a little bit on Taiwan's history and from a family's everyday lives. And I mean, the best part is that you can also see some very good food from the TV series.
And we know that's the most important.
Yes, because it's in Tainan, so everything is sweet and like the story. So I would definitely recommend that. You can also see it on Netflix, I think.
Oh, awesome. The Making of an Ordinary Woman.
Yes.
That sounds really interesting. Maybe we should go check that
It's
out.
perfect weather for binge watching TV, in my opinion. So.
Honestly, yeah, have some 牛肉面 and watch.
Sure.
But no, thank you so much for this. This was really an enriching,
Enlightening conversation.
enlightening, energizing discussion, if you will. We're really excited that we got to cover energy security because it's just been a topic, and obviously here in the U.S. we're really excited now about new sources of energy, power, etc. So yeah, thanks for coming by, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
I always love having our friends from DSET on our podcast or here in the studio because they're just doing such amazing research and really at the frontier, I think, of all the tech conversations in Taiwan. So thank you, Tsaiying, for joining us for that. Libby, what did you think of the discussion?
So for me, I think it's always really valuable to have the experts in because sometimes they complicate the picture in a very helpful way, actually. So, on my front, I will say that I became kind of laser focused on this question of what energy source is going to be crucial for Taiwan in the future. But something that I think Tsaiying very helpfully pointed out is that there are a lot more factors that go into it than that. So for instance, it's about how do you structure your grid to optimize for all of the things that you need to provide energy for. She talked a lot about Taiwan's grid centralization and their efforts to sort of decentralize and distribute energy along that, both to serve their technological needs, their national security needs, and the people's needs. And so I think that, that was just a really helpful way to kind of reorient the conversation around the different factors that Taiwan is thinking of and that they are thinking of them.
Yeah, I think she talked a little bit more about renewables than I had expected. And so maybe that actually has to do with the tech piece, with the solar panel piece, due to China's dominance of it. But of course, Taiwan is not putting its eggs in one basket, right? They are still really part of that big LNG project or deal with Korea and Japan and the United States, of course. So it's interesting and I guess reassuring to hear that Taiwan is considering all these different avenues, just like you said, right, of the energy sources, but also how do you make your just entire energy, how do you make everything just more resilient? I also really enjoyed her explanation of the new, more advanced sources of energy that they're considering, just the small modular reactors. Also, their conversations around fusion. Obviously, fusion, just like she said, is very difficult. I mean, we know this too. But just, the fact that the conversation is happening, I think, is very encouraging. Last thing I would say, actually, I'm happy that they're looking towards allies and partners that have experienced similar challenges. So I'm really excited to see what happens, with Taiwan's conversations with Poland, with Ukraine, with Estonia, et cetera, right? All these other countries in Europe, for example, that have faced a lot of these similar challenges.
Yeah, and I appreciate that those conversations are not at just the strategic level, right? It's really tactical. It's how are people installing solar panels to help support the grid and things like that. I thought that was really refreshing.
Well, with that, thank you again to Tsaiying from DSET, always giving shout outs to DSET. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us, and we look straight forward to seeing you next time.